Have you ever known exactly what God was asking you to do, but you still waited? You waited for confirmation, you waited for everyone to agree, and you waited until you felt confident. You even waited until the timing felt perfect. And the truth is, many high capacity women aren't waiting for someone else to validate what God has already spoken. And every day they wait and they delay the very breakthrough God wants to bring through their obedience. And tonight I want to talk about Deborah, not simply as a judge, not simply as a prophet, but as a leader who moved with conviction while everyone else hesitated. Because biblical leadership is not about having the loudest voice, it's about having the conviction to obey the voice of God before everyone else sees what he sees. So, welcome to the Arise Coaching Hour with Dr. Martha Nessler, where we renew our minds, we reclaim our identity, and align our lives with heaven's blueprint so we can rise into the life God created us to live. So I'm really excited here because I believe there's a bit of a problem, and that is that high capacity, high functioning women are waiting for permission. And one of the greatest leadership traps is believing that someone else needs to validate your assignment. And I want you to hear that because sometimes, even though God has told us to move, we wait for someone else to validate what he's asked us to do. And a lot of times, women, they know what God's asked them to do and they know what they're called to do. But we're just in such a culture of asking others' opinions and seeking opinion. It's that overthinking and overanalyzing that gets us in trouble. And just like looking for one more bit of confirmation, but God has simply asked for one thing. And that one thing is our obedience. One of the things I have found the hardest about obedience is sometimes God might ask you to do something just to see if you'll do it. And the truth is, the more women I coach in leadership, in business, I've began to learn that women kind of do sit sometimes and hesitate. And they're like, I know God wants me to do this, but I don't know how, or I don't know what my family will think, or I'm not sure I'm going to make it work. And they sit with it. And sometimes they do sit with it too long. Now, the thing about Deborah is she became a leader, and it was not because she was specifically appointed by someone, but she was specifically appointed by God. And people saw the favor of the Lord on her life and they recognized her wisdom and they came to her. So, the thing I want to say about that is that we have to realize authority is not something that is manufactured, it is something that is given by God, and it is something that other people see God's blessing on our life. And how people begin to see authority pour out of you is it stems from your level of intimacy. And in my Arise framework that I use when I work with women, intimacy comes before authority because it's intimacy with God that allows us to step into the authority that God has for us. And the question I want to ask you is, where are you waiting for permission when God's already giving you the assignment? You're looking for permission from outside sources when God's already called you to do something. I talked with a client today and we were talking about a book, and I was explaining to her that I was very clear on the book God wanted me to write, and I'm in a really good position because my relationship with the Lord means that I know that if he wants this book written, that he will provide the way for it to be published, and he will show me that way. And that's really the space that I work with women to get to. And that's where we were working with her on a couple things in her life, is that if it's God's will, he fits the bill. And if he calls us to do it, it will be done, right? So I want to talk a little bit about discernment because that's something that I really feel that through reading about Deborah, that's who we're kind of covering as her leadership, is Deborah. She had conviction, right? And she had discernment, and her conviction came from her discernment because Deborah knew the voice of God. She knew how to hear God, and she knew how to lead from a knowingness of what God told her. And she was highly convicted, and her discernment and understanding the Lord's ways, his wills, and his words is what led her to have the confidence that she had. And Deborah was a very strong leader in a time where women were not leading. And God put her in a position where she was a prophet, and she was actually leading the military. She was also a judge. And, you know, her confidence was in the Lord. And because her confidence was in the Lord, she knew that the Lord would guide her and that the Lord would help her navigate in a very masculine driven world. And that same thing is for us, whether you are a female in a more masculine type role, or whether you're building a faith-based business in a very secular world. The confidence is not in how will the world perceive me, and the confidence is not as how will I show up in this masculine world. It is how do I keep my eyes on God? Because God is going to be the one who directs my paths. And I think I think a lot of women, they lack confidence because they're disconnected from their source of wisdom, from the source that gives them this sense of knowing, because they just get disconnected from God. And that stems from this busyness epidemic that we have. And people are so busy being busy that because they're busy, they don't fully hear the word of the Lord. There's not clarity in their actions. And when we have clarity, we have confidence. When we have discernment, we have confidence. And so that is that focusing on intimacy with the Lord and knowing his voice and being able to hear his voice, even amidst a chaotic situation, is where true strength and wisdom comes from. But I want you to say this is that I want to say this, and I want you to hear me. The more time you spend in God's presence, the less dependent you become on human approval. So the more time you spend in God's presence, the less time you become on society's approval. The more time you spend in God's presence, the less dependent you become on what other people have to say in general. But once again, that is born in intimacy. Conviction, discernment, and wisdom come from your intimacy with the Lord. And you can tell when a person has spent time with the Lord in the way that they carry themselves, in the way they have a knowingness, in the way they execute their plan, because it's almost as though that could only be from the Lord. So, many women delay obedience because they really fear in disappointing people. They don't want the criticism, the conflict, the misunderstanding, the rejection. So they stay quiet. And I work with a lot of women, and this might be you, where you've got this thing that you know you should do, that the Lord just keeps you up at night. He stirs you. You're really good at it. It could keep you awake knowing that people need this, but you just kind of stay quiet because you're worried what other people will think. You're worried how to be perceived. You're not sure how to get it done. But we have to stop and think, if, Deborah had waited for everyone's approval, Israel would have remained oppressed, because I can almost guarantee you that not everyone approved of Deborah's position and authority. But Deborah was operating for an audience of one, which is I recommend my clients, and I'll recommend to you. When you post on Instagram, when you share on social media, you're performing for an audience of one. You are not performing for likes of other people. And that's what we really get caught up in society, is what do people like? And, I'll throw this in, is the biggest shift for me, and the biggest shift I see in my clients is when we make a post on social media, or we make a pitch to someone, or we talk to a client about a possible care plan or something. Make a business decision. If it's just for God, it's a knowingness that God wants us to do it, that he's watching us, that it's for him. Everything shifts. And we're seeing that shift in our businesses. We're seeing that shift in our Instagram posts. And so really operating from the point of, I'm here operating on this earth, and everything that I do with my family, with my business, with my health is for an audience of one. That will keep you living and walking out your faith, because what holds you back is fear, and fear will literally rob you of what is important. It will keep you from fully walking out what God's called you to do. And even if it's that God's called you to be the best stay-at-home mom on the planet, if you live in a state of fear, you will be paralyzed in fear, and you will not fully walk that out. So a question I want to ask you is, whose approval are you still seeking that God never even asked you to get their approval? Right? God's like, he wants you to do what he called you to do, not to get the approval of everybody else. One of the other lessons here that I love from Deborah, there's so many different ones, is I think one of the people that in Deborah we kind of overlook is Heber, because Heber, he stayed neutral. He's probably the one who told Sisera that the Israelites were there, and he kind of didn't side with Israel like he should have. I think he was an ancestor of an ancestor. I forget who he was, whose lineage he was in. Maybe Abraham. Sorry, cannot remember that right this moment. But he kind of took the easy route, where Sisera, they've got the 900 iron chariots. I'm going to go with them. But in his staying neutral, I think he put his wife in an awkward position. Jael was left then at her tent alone with Sisera running into her tent. And the reason I want to bring him up is because I think Heber shows us another possibility where we can step into a weakness as a leader. And that's when we don't make decisions based on conviction, because truthfully, he should have sided with the Israelites. But he made his decision out of convenience and probably a little bit out of fear. I don't know him, and the Bible doesn't say. But the reason I bring this up is because sometimes I think that when we stay neutral, like he was kind of didn't really care, probably tipped off Sisera, but kind of just kept his tent over here. When we stay neutral, it can cause us to not have the influence that God intended us to have. So, he just kind of sat there to the side. Now, the other perspective I will say that we can look at this is God had Heber there for such a time as this, right? That Jael would be able to drive that tent peg through Sisera. So obviously it's up in the air, but I kind of like to extract exactly what happened and teach on that. But, we also look at Barak, because Barak, he really did hesitate. And I think that if we looked at it, we would safe to say that Deborah had a better connection with the Lord and listened to the Lord. So therefore she probably had more intimacy than Barak, because Barak was thinking, I know Deborah hears the Lord. I don't know that I hear the Lord. So he kind of relied on Deborah to get him there. He said, I'll go if you go, but I'm not going to go by myself. And Deborah said, okay, I'm going to go with you. But, just so you know that because of this, Sisera will be delivered into the hands of a woman. And that's when we have to stop, because leadership, Barak was not just leading an army. His kids were watching, his family was watching, the army was watching, everyone's watching. And for you, your kids are watching, like your team, your clients, your employees, the internet, whatever. And your obedience will cause a ripple effect of obedience. People will see your obedience and they will be encouraged by your obedience. Your courage will give someone else courage, and your faith will give someone else faith. And when we look at Deborah and her courage and her obedience, and we see what her faith did, it shifted an entire culture, and it gave the Israelites freedom for 40 more years. So it's kind of like, who's waiting on the other side of your obedience? And what kind of example are you setting in your leadership? I just want to remind you that Deborah shows us that God uses who is available, because she made that point. Hey, if it's not you that wants to do this, Barak, if you're not willing to fully trust the Lord, like the Lord will use someone. And we look at Jael, and she was available and she was there. And she, even though her husband's alliance was more than likely with Sisera, her alliance was with God. And she knew she was aligned with the Israelites. And she did what was necessary to save the people of Israel. And so, you have to realize that your availability will always matter more to God than your ability. Like, he wants an available heart, He wants a willing heart. Yes, women were setting up the tent, so she did know how to drive that tent peg. And I'm like, go JL, because I'm not sure I could do it. But he loves our availability. He wants an available heart and a willing heart. So here's some activation questions I want you to ask yourself. Where am I waiting for permission instead of walking in obedience? What decision have I delayed because I fear criticism? Am I leading from conviction or from consensus? And whose approval has become louder than God's voice? And lastly, what would leadership look like if I fully trusted what God has already spoken? So the leadership takeaways, those were just kind of the coaching questions I had, but leadership begins with intimacy and not position. Conviction comes from hearing God's voice. People pleasing will delay your purpose. Staying neutral is often fear disguised as wisdom. Your courage becomes someone else's courage. Obedience creates breakthrough that can ripple effect through generations. God uses surrendered people more than qualified people. And biblical leadership is acting on God's voice before everyone else sees what he sees. Now, if this has blessed you, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. I would love for you to like this video and comment on what spoke to you. I will let you know that for those of you who are in my private community, right after I finish just a few more things, I will meet you on Zoom. So people in my private community will break down those questions that I brought up here. And if this message resonated with you today, I want you to think about this. Maybe you're not lacking confidence, and maybe you're not lacking permission. And maybe the permission you've been waiting for has already been given by God. Deborah didn't lead because everyone believed in her. She led because she believed the God who called her. And because one woman was willing to obey, an entire nation experienced 40 years of peace. Your leadership isn't just about your success. It's about the freedom your obedience releases into the lives of others. If this message encouraged you, make sure you subscribe, share it with other women who have been waiting for permission to lead, and comment "Arise" below. And if you're ready to renew your mind, reclaim your identity, align your life with heaven's blueprint, come join us inside of the She Made God Her CEO community. We have both free and prayed. I love you guys, and I will see you next Thursday for the Arise Hour.